"Sir, this area is restricted. Are you lost?" The voice was sharp, laced with the kind of impatient authority that a young officer wears like a new uniform, stiff, clean, and a size too big for his experience. Lieutenant Evans stood with his hands on his hips, his white uniform a stark slash against the gray steel of the pier and the immense black hull of the submarine moored beside it. The USS Tempest sat low in the water, a silent, sleeping leviathan. The old man he addressed didn't flinch. He simply stood there, a frail figure in a worn tweed jacket, his gaze fixed not on the officer but on the submarine. His name was Arthur Connolly, a name that meant nothing to the lieutenant, and at that moment meant nothing to anyone else on the pier. He was just an old man, his skin a roadmap of 80+ years, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, showing the swollen knuckles of arthritis. "This is an active naval installation," Evans continued, stepping closer, his voice rising slightly to cut through the sea breeze and the distant clang of metal on metal. "Civilians are not permitted this far without an escort. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me back to the security gate." He made a small, dismissive gesture as if shooing a stray dog. Arthur's eyes, the color of a faded sea chart, finally moved from the submarine and settled on the young officer. They were calm, observant, and held a depth that seemed to absorb the lieutenant's bluster without reflection. "I have an invitation," Arthur said, his voice quiet but clear, not a quaver in it. The lieutenant almost laughed. He exchanged a look with the two young sailors who stood watch at the gangway, a silent communication of shared disbelief. An 80-something man in a jacket that looked older than they were, claiming he had an invitation to board one of the Navy's most advanced nuclear submarines. The idea was absurd. A crowd was beginning to form, not a large one, but a noticeable collection of sailors and contractors, their curiosity piqued by the confrontation. The sight of a crisp young officer dressing down a senior citizen was unusual enough to make them pause their work. "An invitation," Evans repeated, his tone dripping with condescension. "Right. And I suppose Admiral Nimitz sent it to you himself." "Sir, I don't have time for games. You are a security risk. Now let's see some identification, and then you can tell me who you were supposed to be meeting." He held out his hand, palm up, expectant and demanding. Arthur reached slowly into his jacket pocket. The movement was deliberate, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. This calm deliberation seemed to irritate the lieutenant even more. It was a silent refusal to be rushed, a quiet defiance that Evans couldn't quite label as insubordination but felt like it all the same. The onlookers shuffled their feet, murmuring to each other. They could feel the tension ratcheting up, a palpable thing in the salty air. Every word from the lieutenant was a slight, a small chip at the old man's dignity. Evans seemed to relish it, playing to his small audience, establishing his authority. "Is he senile?" one sailor whispered to another, just loud enough to be heard. "Probably just wandered off from the visitors' center," the other replied. "Poor old guy." Evans heard them. A small smirk touched the corner of his lips. He was in control. He was the guardian of the gate, the protector of this billion-dollar piece of military hardware. He represented order and security. The old man represented confusion, a loose thread to be snipped. "Come on, old-timer," Evans pressed, wiggling his fingers. "The ID, or we can do this the hard way." From his pocket, Arthur produced not a wallet, but an old cracked leather billfold, held together by a fraying rubber band. It looked ancient, an artifact from another time. The lieutenant's smirk widened into a sneer of contempt. He snatched the billfold from Arthur's hand, his movements jerky and impatient. He snapped the rubber band off and fumbled it open, his eyes scanning for a driver's license or a military ID. What he found instead were yellowed newspaper clippings, a faded photograph of a young woman, and a dog-eared piece of paper with a list of names. There was no official identification. "This is a joke," Evans said, his voice flat with annoyance. "There's nothing in here. No driver's license, no state ID, nothing." He shook the billfold as if a proper ID might fall out. "Who are you?" "My name is Arthur Connolly," the old man repeated, his voice still impossibly steady. "I was invited." "Invited by who? For what?" Evans was shouting now, his face reddening. The crowd had grown. More sailors, a few petty officers, even a chief who was walking the pier had stopped to observe the scene. The lieutenant felt the weight of their eyes on him. He had to resolve this. He couldn't look weak or incompetent. He jabbed a finger at Arthur's jacket lapel. "What is this thing?" Pinned to the tweed was a small, tarnished silver pin. It was shaped like a dolphin, but it was worn, the details smoothed over by time and touch. It was barely recognizable. "A toy?" Evans mocked. "Did you get that out of a cereal box?" Arthur's gaze dropped to the pin. His expression didn't change, but his eyes seemed to look past the lieutenant, past the pier, past the present moment entirely. The air around him was thick with the smell of diesel, sweat, and the cold metallic tang of the deep ocean. The deck of the submarine pitched violently, and a wave of freezing North Atlantic water crashed over the sail, drenching him. He was 24 years old, his face smudged with grease, his body aching with a fatigue so profound it felt like it had settled in his bones. The boat had been submerged for 70 days, running silent, running deep, hunted by Soviet destroyers. They had completed the mission, but the cost had been immense. His captain, a man he revered, pressed the silver pin into his hand. It was the submarine warfare insignia. His dolphins. "You earned these, son," the captain had said, his voice hoarse. "You earned them in the dark." The silver was new then, and it gleamed under the weak Arctic sun. "Sir," the lieutenant's voice pulled him back. Arthur blinked, the memory receding like a phantom tide. He looked at Evans, who was now holding the tarnished pin between his thumb and forefinger, still attached to the jacket. "I'm done with this," Evans declared, his patience completely gone. "You are trespassing on a secure military asset. You refuse to identify yourself. You are being detained." He gestured to the two young sailors at the gangway. "Escort this man to base security." The two sailors hesitated. They were young, barely out of their teens. Manhandling an elderly man, no matter the orders, felt wrong. They looked from the lieutenant to Arthur, a silent plea for a different outcome in their eyes. But it was a different set of eyes that changed the course of the day. Standing at the edge of the growing crowd was a Master Chief Petty Officer, a man whose face was a testament to 30 years of naval service. Master Chief Thorne wasn't watching the lieutenant. He was studying the old man. He had seen the quiet dignity, the unnerving calm, the way the old man's eyes had scanned the submarine, not with the idle curiosity of a tourist, but with the familiar gaze of a craftsman inspecting a tool. And he had seen the pin. It was tarnished, yes, but Thorne knew exactly what it was. He had a set of his own, polished and proud on his uniform. He'd also seen the way the old man stood, his back straight despite his age, his feet planted slightly apart, the stance of a lifelong sailor accustomed to a rolling deck. Something was profoundly wrong here. Lieutenants came and went, full of fire and regulations, but men like Arthur Connolly were the bedrock. Thorne had a gut feeling, the kind that had kept him and his crews safe in dangerous waters for decades. That feeling was now screaming at him that Lieutenant Evans was making a mistake of catastrophic proportions. While Evans was trying to bully the young sailors into action, Thorne slipped back from the crowd, pulling his phone from his pocket. He didn't call base security. He knew that would just escalate the situation through the wrong channels, burying the old man in a mountain of paperwork and suspicion. He needed to go higher. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hovering over a number he rarely used, a direct line to an aide he knew at Esplant, Submarine Force Atlantic Headquarters. He pressed the call button. "Commander's office, Petty Officer Davis speaking." "Davis, it's Master Chief Thorne over at Pier 7. Thorne kept his voice low and urgent. "Listen, I have a strange situation here. There's an old gentleman on the pier for the Tempest. A young LT is giving him hell, about to have him detained." "Okay, Master Chief. What's the man's name? I can try to see if he's on an access list." "That's the thing," Thorne said, watching as Evans finally lost his temper and grabbed Arthur by the arm. "The LT is making a scene, but the old man, he's just standing there. He says his name is Arthur Connolly." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then Master Chief, "Say that name again." "Connolly. Arthur Connolly." The silence stretched longer this time, filled only by the faint static of the connection. Thorne could picture the aide on the other end, the blood draining from his face. "Master Chief," the aide's voice was now a choked whisper. "Keep that lieutenant away from him. Do whatever you have to do. The Admiral is on his way." The line went dead. Thorne stared at his phone for a second, a cold dread mixing with a grim sense of vindication. He was right. This was a very, very big deal. Inside the Esabilan headquarters building, a pristine structure of brick and glass miles away from the pier, Petty Officer Davis had dropped his phone into its cradle and burst into the Admiral's inner office without knocking. A breach of protocol so severe it was almost unthinkable. Admiral Stanton, a man with 3 stars on his collar, and the weight of the entire Atlantic submarine fleet on his shoulders, looked up from a classified briefing, his eyes narrowed in annoyance. "Davis, what is it?" "Sir," the aide stammered, out of breath. "A call from Master Chief Thorne at Pier 7. Sir, it's about Captain Connolly." Stanton's face went blank. He processed the words, but they didn't seem to fit together. "Captain Connolly? What about him?" "He's at the pier, sir, for the Tempest. And Lieutenant Evans is trying to arrest him for trespassing." The Admiral stared at his aide. For a full 5 seconds, he didn't move a muscle. The only sound in the opulent office was the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Then, in a single fluid motion, he rose from his chair, his face a mask of cold fury and disbelief. He swept the classified files off his desk into a secure briefcase. "Get the car," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Get my car to the front of this building in 2 minutes. And get the ceremonial guard mustered at the pier. Use my authority. Tell them to move like their lives depend on it. Because someone's career just might." He was already shrugging on his jacket, his movements precise and economical. The annoyance was gone, replaced by a terrifying, focused urgency. Arthur Connolly, here, being harassed by one of his junior officers. The thought was a violation, a sacrilege against the very history of the institution he led. Back at Pier 7, Lieutenant Evans had reached his breaking point. The old man's placid refusal to be intimidated, the hesitation of the sailors, and the growing audience of onlookers had shredded his composure. He was making a fool of himself. He had to end this now. He grabbed Arthur's frail arm, his fingers digging into the thin tweed of the jacket. "That's it. You are under arrest for trespassing and failing to obey a lawful order," Evans announced, his voice loud and strained. "We can sort this out down at the station. Maybe a night in a cell will jog your memory." He began to physically pull Arthur away from the submarine's gangway. The crowd gasped. A few of the older petty officers looked away, disgusted. This had gone from a simple misunderstanding to an ugly abuse of power. Arthur didn't resist. He allowed himself to be pulled, his expression one of weary resignation. He had seen young men like this before, men whose certainty far outstripped their wisdom. It was a tale as old as time. Just as Evans was about to shove Arthur toward the waiting security personnel, a sound sliced through the air, distinct from the normal symphony of the naval base. It was the piercing chirp of a staff car siren, used only for flag officers. Heads snapped toward the road leading to the pier. A gleaming black sedan, the Admiral's flags fluttering from its front fenders, sped toward them, its tires squealing as it came to an abrupt halt just feet from the confrontation. It was followed closely by a large white van that skidded to a stop right behind it. The driver's side door of the sedan flew open and Admiral Stanton emerged. He was a storm in a white uniform, his face thunderous, his 3 stars glittering on his collar. He didn't even glance at Lieutenant Evans. His eyes, burning with a fierce intensity, locked immediately onto Arthur. Simultaneously, the back doors of the van flew open, and a full dozen sailors in immaculate dress uniforms, the base ceremonial guard, poured out. They moved with silent, drilled precision, forming 2 perfect ranks between the Admiral's car and the assembled crowd. The slam of car doors, the rhythmic stomp of polished boots on asphalt, the sudden absolute silence that fell over the pier. It was a spectacle of power and authority that stunned everyone present into statues. Lieutenant Evans froze, his hand still clamped on Arthur's arm. He stared, mouth agape, at the 3-star Admiral now striding purposefully toward him. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. This couldn't be happening. He tried to process the scene, but his mind refused to work. Admirals didn't come down to the piers unless a ship was deploying or a foreign dignitary was visiting. They certainly didn't arrive with a full honor guard for a trespassing old man. Admiral Stanton marched directly past the paralyzed lieutenant as if he were a piece of deck equipment. He came to a halt 2 feet in front of Arthur Connolly. He took a deep breath, his back ramrod straight. Then he executed the sharpest, most profound salute of his long and decorated career. His hand sliced through the air and stopped, quivering at the brim of his hat. "Captain Connolly," the Admiral's voice boomed across the silent pier, a voice accustomed to commanding fleets, now imbued with a tone of the deepest reverence. "It is an honor to have you back on the waterfront, sir. I apologize for the reception. We were not expecting you this early." "Captain." The word hung in the air, electric and impossible. Lieutenant Evans's hand dropped from Arthur's arm as if it had been burned. "Captain?" This frail, confused old man. He looked at the tarnished pin on Arthur's jacket, and for the first time he saw it not as a cheap toy, but as what it was, the mark of a submariner. The crowd murmured, a wave of shock and dawning comprehension spreading through them. Master Chief Thorne, standing near the back, allowed himself a small, grim smile. The cavalry had arrived. Admiral Stanton held his salute, his eyes locked on Arthur's. Arthur slowly, deliberately raised a hand and returned a tired but perfect salute. It was the salute of a man who had given and received it thousands of times, a gesture ingrained in his very soul. "At ease, Admiral," Arthur said, his voice carrying a hint of its old command authority. "No need for all this fuss." Stanton finally lowered his hand. He turned, and his gaze fell upon Lieutenant Evans. The warmth and reverence in his eyes vanished, replaced by a glacier of pure, undiluted fury. "Lieutenant," he began, his voice dropping to a low, lethal hum that was more terrifying than any shout. "What is your name?" "Evans, sir." "Lieutenant Evans," he stammered, his body snapping to a panicked, rigid brace. "Lieutenant Evans," the Admiral repeated, letting the name hang in the air like a death sentence. "While you have been busy enforcing security regulations, you have failed in a far more fundamental duty, the duty of respect, the duty of knowing your own history." He gestured toward Arthur. "Do you have any idea who this is?" Evans could only shake his head, his face pale with terror. "This," the Admiral said, his voice rising again, projecting to every person on the pier, "is Captain Arthur Connolly. The man who in 1968 commanded the USS Stingray on a 120-day patrol under the Arctic ice pack. The man who navigated through uncharted trenches to gather intelligence that prevented a war. The man who, when his boat was crippled by a fire in the reactor compartment, refused to abandon ship and personally led the damage control team into a radiation-filled space to save his boat and his 130-man crew, an act for which he was awarded the Medal of Honor. He is not a trespasser, Lieutenant. He is a living legend. This pier, this submarine, this entire Navy was built by men like him, men whose boots you are not fit to polish." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Medal of Honor. The name Connolly now clicked into place in the minds of the older sailors. Connolly of the Stingray. He was a myth, a story they told in the chief's mess, a name spoken with the same reverence as Halsey or Nimitz. And he was here, standing right in front of them, dressed in a shabby tweed coat, being harassed by an arrogant lieutenant. A wave of shame washed over the onlookers. They looked at Arthur now with awe, their eyes tracing the lines on his face, trying to see the hero beneath the veil of age. Admiral Stanton wasn't finished. He stepped closer to Evans, his voice dropping back to that icy personal level. "You stand on the shoulders of giants, Lieutenant. You would do well to learn to recognize one when he is standing right in front of you. Your commanding officer will be hearing from me. You can consider your tour on the Tempest over. Your new assignment is to develop and personally lead a base-wide training program on naval heritage. You will start with the story of Captain Connolly. You will learn it, you will know it, and you will teach it until you understand what it means to serve." The rebuke was total, a professional evisceration delivered with surgical precision. Evans stood, broken and humiliated, unable to speak, unable to even meet the Admiral's eyes. It was then that Arthur stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the Admiral's arm. "That's enough, Bill," he said softly, using the Admiral's first name. The lieutenant was doing his job. Security is paramount. He saw an old man where he shouldn't be. His instincts were correct, even if his methods were a little enthusiastic. He's a good officer. Don't ruin him. The grace of the gesture was stunning. After the public humiliation he had endured, Arthur's first instinct was to show mercy, to defend the very man who had wronged him. It was a demonstration of character so profound that it silenced the entire pier once more. The Admiral looked at Arthur, his expression softening. He nodded slowly. "As you wish, Captain." He then turned and gestured toward the submarine. "She's ready for you, sir. The crew is eager to meet you." The USS Tempest was the newest boat in the fleet, and she was being named in a quiet, informal ceremony in honor of Arthur's old command, the Stingray, which had been decommissioned decades ago. This was his invitation. As Arthur looked at the sleek, powerful submarine, the present faded one last time. He wasn't on a pier in the 21st century. He was in the cramped control room of the Stingray, the air thick with the smell of ozone and fear. The boat groaned around him, protesting the immense pressure of the deep. A young sailor, his face pale with terror, had handed him a damage report. A fire in the reactor tunnel. A death sentence. Arthur had taken the report, looked at the faces of his young crew, and made a decision. He had grabbed a radiation suit and an extinguisher. "I'm going in," he had said. His executive officer had tried to stop him. "It's suicide, Captain." But he had gone anyway, because a captain never ever gives up the ship. That was the day he had truly earned his dolphins. Admiral Stanton escorted Arthur personally up the gangway. Every sailor on the pier, from the rawest recruit to the most seasoned Master Chief, snapped to attention and rendered a salute as he passed. Lieutenant Evans, still standing alone and ashamed, raised a trembling hand to his own forehead, his salute a silent apology. In the weeks that followed, the story of Captain Connolly's visit became base legend. Lieutenant Evans was, as the Admiral had ordered, reassigned. He didn't complain. He accepted his new duty with a humility he had never known. He spent his days in the base archives, poring over old patrol reports and service records, his nights drafting lesson plans. He read everything he could find about the Stingray and her captain. He learned about the fire, the heroism, the quiet, unassuming life Arthur had lived after his retirement from the Navy. One afternoon, Evans was in the base museum studying a display case dedicated to the Stingray, which contained a grainy photo of a young, intense-looking Captain Connolly. He was a good man, a quiet voice said beside him. Evans turned. It was Arthur. He was wearing the same tweed jacket. Evans felt a flush of shame and stood straighter. Captain Connolly, sir, at ease, son, Arthur said with a small smile. He looked at the display. They make you out to be some kind of plaster saint in these things. The truth is, most of the time we were just scared kids trying to do the right thing. Sir, Evans began, his voice thick with emotion, I want to apologize for my conduct on the pier. There is no excuse. I was arrogant, and I was disrespectful. I am truly sorry. Arthur looked at the young man, really looked at him, and saw not the arrogant officer from that day, but a humbled, remorseful man. He saw a glimmer of the leader he might one day become. He clapped him gently on the shoulder. Apology accepted, Lieutenant. We all have lessons to learn. The important thing is that we learn them. They stood in silence for a moment. Two sailors from different eras, bound by a shared service and a moment of unforgettable humility. If you were moved by Captain Connolly's story of valor and humility, please like this video, share it with someone who respects our veterans, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories that honor our heroes. Thank you for watching.